Welcome to the Valmika Property Investing Podcast. I'm JP, your host and the founder of Valmika Buyers Agency. With my background in investment banking, I'm here to share Wall Street tips and secrets for building a top 4% property portfolio. Let's dive into the world of property investment together. Welcome to another episode. This episode is titled Mastering the Art of Negotiating Property Acquisitions. This is a great skill to have because it can make the difference of getting a good deal and a bad deal. So practicing negotiation tactics, researching how to become more effective as a negotiator can take you a long way, not only in your property acquisitions, but in everyday life. I mean, let's face it, I've got a 4-year-old and every day I'm negotiating with him. So it can help you in all areas of life. But of course, this is focused on property negotiations. I'm going to take you through a few different topics on property negotiation. I'm going to speak to you from a high level on these topics. If you would like me to go into more detail in any of them, please let me know in the comments. Let's get straight to it. As with anything, when it comes to business and transactions, preparation is paramount. This also applies to negotiation. So where we start is know your market. That's probably one of the most important areas to focus on. If you have done your research on recent sales and comparable properties in the area, you give yourself a solid foundation on what to negotiate from. If you don't understand your market, if you don't have a good grounding on it, your negotiation will be flawed from the beginning. We go into more detail, and it's something that not many people will be able to do, but we have algorithms that allow us to create correlations between different suburbs. So if we have a sale, or if there is a sale in a certain street in a certain suburb, we'll know how it correlates to a percentage amount to where that property price should be in a different suburb. So that's the strength of the research that we do at Valmika. And I encourage you to put a lot of time and effort into this area to give you that sort of foundation for negotiations. Secondly, and I've mentioned this to you before in other podcasts, property acquisitions is about speed. It's a very competitive market, especially in Australia. So being able to move quickly gives you a leg up and a competitive advantage when you're negotiating. So make sure you get your pre-approvals. Make sure that your financing is secured so that you know that when you go into the negotiation, you can move quickly and actually close out on the deal. It will set you back if you're still trying to get your financing, because then the negotiations will go to waste because the seller will think that you are not serious. Thirdly, and a good one to include in your arsenal, is identifying potential issues with the property. So inspect the property thoroughly and understand what the repair costs are. Those repair costs you can use as leverage in your negotiation, and I'll explain that in a bit later. Set your offer range. Determine what your ideal price is and what your maximum budget is realistically. Tie this back to knowing your market. You don't want to be offering too much that you overpay for the asset, or too little that you won't have you'll be wasting your time in the negotiation. Okay, so that is the preparation component. Now let's move into the communication and influencing component. This is where the skill set comes into play, and I encourage you to practice this skill set. The first point to make under this topic is the building rapport with the seller and the agent. So when you speak with the seller and agent, it's good to try and break down barriers. Everyone's in this transaction to make money. You're in it to save money. The seller's in it to make money. If you can break down those barriers and relieve the tension between the two parties, it will enable you to negotiate more effectively. But how do you do that? Spend time listening and understanding their motivations and their timelines. What we do is we look for signs of seller risk aversion and time pressures. So if we gauge and we ask questions to gauge if the seller is risk averse, signs that a seller will be risk averse are if they're older. So if the seller is older, they tend to be less risk, will tend to be risk averse and less likely to want to drag on the negotiation. They will be less likely wanting to lose a good potential buyer. So we try and gauge this from the agent, or if we get the chance to speak to the seller. Secondly, what we look for are time pressures. So if the seller has, for example, committed to another property, they don't have the luxury of dragging this sale on for long. So that is a good sign that they'll be open to negotiating. So these are the areas that we focus on. Secondly, ask insightful questions. So uncover the underlying reasons for why they're pricing the property where it is, and understand why and how they'll be willing to negotiate. So they may be comparing it to some properties in the suburb, but because you've done your homework and you understand the market properly, you can use correlation metrics from other suburbs to justify why their price may be too high, for example. So ask those insightful questions. And once you gather that information, you'll be able to use your arsenal of research that you've done to negotiate more effectively. Thirdly, highlight your strengths as a buyer. Advertise to them that you're pre-approved. Advertise to them that this is a done deal. Get that confidence across to them so that they know that they won't be wasting their time and to take you seriously. If they're taking you seriously, they'll be more open to negotiating with you freely. How you do this is how you convey your message. Not only do you have to have all your ducks in a row, so to speak, and have everything approved for you to move, but you need to speak confidently and calmly about it. I've seen negotiations where some people use strategies of trying to bully the seller. This doesn't work in your favor. You need to speak calmly. You need to come across that you are a respectable person, that you respect them, and through that, you'll be able to break down barriers in the negotiation more effectively. Now, the way you convey your contingencies, now what I mean by that, those are your methods to being able to convince the seller that what you're offering is a good deal. So those are, for example, waiving your 2-week cooling off period. Maybe, for example, shortening the settlement period so that the seller can get their money quicker. I wouldn't offer those all up front. Use them strategically so that when the other side comes back with counters, you can bring in those contingencies to win your side of where you're trying to bid, so to speak. And you can use areas like I mentioned before. So if there are extra costs that you have to put into the house, throw those in when the time needs be. So it'll help them understand why you're pricing it where it is, and it'll make them think, okay, that sounds realistic. So use those strategies dependent on when they are necessary. Don't give them all in one go. All right, so since we touched on those strategies, what are the negotiation strategies? Number one, and that's to leverage off your comparable sales data. That is effective strategy because it's factual. You can't argue facts. If you can support your market research with actual numbers and correlation numbers and how you actually came to that, it's very difficult for the other side to not agree with it because they're factual. Then, as we touched on before, identify potential concessions. So speak on potential closing costs, for example. You might offer to pay part of their or reimburse part of their land tax, for example, as a negotiation concession. Then speak about repairs in the property. Say to them, look, you are pricing your property at this level. However, the property is run down, for example, and these are the costs that it will take to repair it. Therefore, you got to convince them to consider those when showing the actual offer price that they're wanting to achieve. And use other concessions like furniture inclusions, for example, as negotiation tactics. Thirdly, use time pressure to your advantage. If appropriate, mention that you've got limited viewing windows. Just as the seller's agents create the illusion of competition with other buyers in the market, you need to create the illusion of other properties that you're interested in the market. So create that competition back and use time pressure of you wanting to move on those other properties if this one's not appropriate to your advantage. Create that illusion, create that time pressure to your advantage. Fourthly, don't be afraid to walk away. Always have a backup plan. If this property doesn't go your way, if you can't secure it for the right price, don't be afraid to walk away and make sure that you have that mindset prior to going into the negotiation. I've seen where people approach this negotiation where it's the only deal that they'll ever be able to make, and then they make a mistake because they've got that mindset. Don't be afraid to walk away. And then, of course, in the negotiation, it's not all about you getting your way. It's about both sides getting something out of the negotiation. So signal your willingness to compromise. Make small concessions to encourage counteroffers. And this will take you a long way into achieving your goals. If you found this podcast valuable and insightful, I'd appreciate some comments and likes. It'll help us keep the lights on with the channel. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Valmika Property Investing Podcast. If you're interested in our services, please visit us at valmikaproperty.com. Remember, the content shared in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. For personalized financial advice, always consult your trusted financial advisor or professional. See you in the next episode.